that this is a climate emergency and the world needs to act immediately. What about the Western developed
policy? And I'm imagining giving my students an assignment and saying, think of a problem that and I think if you do that, climate change has almost all of them. It's caused by invisible, odorless gases, right? Other environmental problems have led to a strong political response because people could smell them and touch them. But climate change is different than that. Of course, these rains are coming more frequently. They're on the third 1,000-year flood in about 5 years in Houston. People are finally waking up to it, but still it's hard to attribute this, any one storm, to climate change. If I had to make up a challenging policy problem, I would make it difficult. I would say vested interests will be challenged by a solution to the problem. And here we have vested interests in terms of And so all these things come together to make climate change an extremely hard problem to solve. Are the Western nations doing enough? Absolutely not. Nobody's doing enough. I mean, let's just be clear. The Paris Agreement was a historic step forward. Historic. It was the largest meeting of heads of state ever outside of New York, that meeting. And by the way, if you read the transcripts of, no head of state goes to a meeting without giving a speech, right? So you can read the speeches of everybody who spoke at the Paris Agreement, every head of state. Not one of them questioned the reality of climate change or the need to take aren't nearly enough to solve this problem, not nearly enough. And the nations of the world aren't actually following through on the Paris commitments. So are the Western countries doing enough? No. Is any country in the world doing enough? No. We need to change course dramatically in order to prevent the worst impacts of climate change.
I agree with whatever you say. This is all the reasons why it's difficult to resolve the problem. But that's why we should always now focus on the triple win policies. All those policies which are good for climate, good for jobs and economy, and good for social issues and the immediate health issues for people at the same time. When China has brought down pollution to the half in the last few years, it's mainly because the air pollution in the cities is so intense that people demanded action and the leadership responded. But that's, of course, very good for climate at the same time. So it's a double win or triple win policy. And we now have if India now moves rapidly into solar energies, it's good for the local pollution, it's good for climate, and it's creating any number of jobs at the same time. I mean, in my view, Prime Minister Modi has changed the debate in India completely. Because for all the years I visited India in the past, there was only one debate. That was, do we want to develop or do we want to take care of Mother Earth? And surprise, surprise, nearly everyone wanted to develop to bring people out of poverty. But that's not a debate any longer, because the policies are available to bring jobs and poverty alleviation while taking care of Mother Earth and the environment at the same time. Sustainable tourism, change to renewable technologies, change to electrical cars and buses, you can name them all.
Right. I think politics drives policy in most countries, and while climate change and acting against climate change is good positioning and good for PR, it is not at the center, front and center of most political parties. We saw a general election in India, and climate action did figure in the manifestos, but was not at the top. Do you believe that is one challenge that needs to be overcome, that good climate policies should be seen as good politics?
Absolutely so, because as you see right now, as we are discussing here, there's a summit going on at the UN General Assembly, which the Secretary General is leading, and we have a variety of heads of state. On Sunday, we actually had a youth summit where young people are increasingly taking responsibility of the climate. Look at a young lady like Greta Thunberg. I mean, who would know that here is a young person who's on a spectrum of Asperger's has actually revolutionized the discussion and the narrative on climate. The issue is we are seeing a looming sword of the Damocles that hangs over us. And it's up to us as a human race now, because it's become an existentialist threat. And this is what it's not about. After all, politicians are human beings too. They have families, they have all those things. They have children who are affected, and they have families that are affected by the very egregious effects. It doesn't matter whether you're rich, poor, black or white. You're just affected by the reality that is global in its phenomena and impacts the local very hard. The important thing is, how do we make sure that this groundswell of voices that are coming out from the young people are better heard? Because these young people are the future vote banks. These politicians want to be smart. If I was one, I would be focusing in a country like India, where the median age is 18, where over 75% of the population is less than 30, is to be really focusing in that group, because that is the group which will evolve and make changes. And that applies to most of the African continent too. So the plug of political will in shaping public policy will have to be absolutely central, fundamentally central.
I have to agree with you, but just for argument's sake, and yes, young people are making their voice heard, but yet you have the U.S. electing a man who says climate change is a hoax. So
hopefully we'll get rid of him at the next election. Right? Look, I think this is so important, and I've been working on this issue for a long time. I've never been more hopeful in terms of the public groundswell on this issue, and we just should stop and pause and realize that demonstrations that happened around the world in the past couple of days may have been the largest demonstrations ever on any issue globally. This is an extraordinary statement from people around the world about the importance of taking on this issue. And in my country, in the United States, this issue is getting more attention than it ever has. Kind of bizarre, but in the 2016 presidential election, journalists didn't ask a single question about climate change in any of the debates between the two presidential candidates. Not one question about this topic. Now it's already dominated the dialogue in the presidential election. So I think, let's be clear, we need to change all this attention into action. Attention isn't enough. We need action too. But attention is a predicate for action. So I think there's a cause for optimism here.
I think also the environment movement of the world should take a little bit of self-criticism, because sometimes we have framed the issue wrongly, I think. We have told people you have to make a choice. Do you want jobs or an economic prosperity, or do you want to solve the climate problem? Then it's a very difficult choice for people. I mean, people want to solve the climate problem, but they also want jobs. Every single human being wants a job. In India, there is 1 million young people joining the labor market every month. All of them want a job. So we need to frame it completely differently. The enormous opportunities solving the climate problems by creating jobs and economic opportunities at the same time. Moving from coal to solar create many more jobs, many cleaner jobs, many more jobs for women. It's a win-win policy. It's not jobs or environment. It's jobs and environment. And of course, cutting down on pollution, again, fantastic for the health of people and great for climate at the same time. So let's really set out fighting climate change as an enormous opportunity for a new and better business. And that's, by the way, why so many business leaders are now ahead of political leaders. They see this. They see that they can create jobs and prosperity by attacking climate problems.
Right. Taking forward from where you left then, do you believe that the solution will come not so much from political action and policy as from science? Because in India we're talking about banning single-use plastic, which is fine in principle, but I need an alternative. Until I find that, I will keep going back to that plastic bag. So it's science that has to come up with a solution, not so much a ban or a rule.
The science has to be backed up by economic opportunities, and this is exactly what Eric is saying. If you look at the green economy, if you look at the blue economy, these are multi-trillion-dollar opportunities where China, frankly, has got ahead of the curve than anybody else. Who would have thought that a major emitter of hydrocarbons has now actually managed to overcome it and actually resolving it? Today, in a place like Delhi, where I come from, there are people as young as 20, 21 years old who are getting lung cancer, who not even smoked a single cigarette in their life. So these are clear. Climate change is also a public health emergency. and globally. It's not limited to a country or a nation state. It affects everybody. So I just feel that today, the very fact that India and China, very interestingly, have actually had the largest forest coverage ever attempted by nation states, and the speed with which they are getting ahead of it is quite fascinating. I believe that this has to be looked at from an economic point of view, an economic opportunity point of view, because, it's between a man who has to provide for his family or work in a coal mine. It's those choices. Those are hard choices that they have to make. And, if we were to put ourselves in those shoes, very, very difficult choices as fathers and mothers. So we just have to find a way where economic growth is incentivized to the green economy, and that's where the future is going to.
One word on the role of the United Nations. There were reports before the UN Climate Summit that countries like Japan and Australia, which are still bullish on fossil fuels, were asked to not come and make a statement there. Do you believe the United Nations can take a tough position and make sure that commitments are followed up with action?
Yeah, I think international cooperation is absolutely essential to solving this problem, and the United Nations plays a central role in this. I think we've had a couple of different Secretary Generals who have made this a priority, and that's extremely important. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is a key institution for moving progress on this forward. So I really commend the Secretary General for convening today's meeting and for helping to shine a spotlight in this issue. One piece of this issue is, unless we do that, we're not going to come up with solutions. We need devices to provide political leaders with the opportunity and incentive to speak on this. And today's meeting is a great example of that.
Well, I fully agree that there is a need for international cooperation, but I tend to believe that the main action is with national leaders and with business. Maybe the fact that the price of solar energy cannot compete with coal everywhere in the world is more important than any global agreement, because it make it possible for every government to make the shift, for every business to make the shift. So I think the developments in what we can call the political economy is more important than global agreement, but we need both. And just to follow up on Sid, just to give one practical example, when Delhi is at its worst, it's when there is an enormous burning of agricultural waste in Haryana and UP, the states around Delhi. It's a horrendous pollution, really making all the problems, cancer, etc. But that's also an enormous waste of resources, because this agriculture waste in a circular economy can be turned into fuel, to fertilizer, to many other products. And again, then you create value, you create jobs, and you solve an environment problem exactly at the same time. And of course we need to move into a circular economy in really basically every area. We point to plastics. Yes, we need to prohibit some items we don't need. What was the need of straw? Can we drink straight from the cup? But there is a lot of plastics we do need. But then we need to bring it in, and we need to recirculate it into a new product. And if the government of India, which is now discussed, make extended producer responsibility, making the companies who produce the plastic also responsible for bringing in the plastic they produce and recircle it, then you will see a major investment from the companies, and also lots of innovation, changes which will be very beneficial. So government and business are in the lead.
Right. I'm going to invite closing comments, and I want to ask you that at a time when countries like the US have pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, and the general consensus seems to be that though it was a game-changing moment, it's failed to achieve the targets it set out to achieve. What are the immediate steps that the international community as a whole can take to arrest, if not stop, this change?
So it is about national political will. It boils down to that. I serve as the United Nations resident coordinator in a country called Kenya. And let me tell you, the strides that Kenya is making in terms of fighting climate change is quite remarkable. In fact, in 2017, it was one of the first countries actually in sub-Saharan Africa to ban single-use plastics. It really is a model case. If you go to Nairobi, where we live and where Eric lived, and which hosts two global headquarters in the south, UN Habitat and UN Environment, the toxicity of the air is just incredible. There's hardly any toxicity. It's a great place. I run half marathons quite regularly there, and let me tell you, my timing has improved exponentially over my time when I was in the Indian Army. So it's quite fascinating that running at that altitude and with that clean air has a transformative effect. It is what President Kenyatta, for example, is demonstrating by personal action, by legislating those actions, and in terms of the kind of transformation that is. Most importantly, is we probably have to look at it from the view of, let's say, what George Bernard Shaw said. He says, some men see things as they are and ask why, and some dream things that never was and ask why not. And many, many political leaders are doing precisely that.
Your comments, Eric.
I was 7 years in the Norwegian government, which at the time I think was one of the greenest governments of any developed nation in the world. But still we didn't do enough. We did not stand up to the test of Greta Thunberg. Did you do enough to solve this major problem of the day? So with the benefit of hindsight, I tried to reflect upon what was the problem. I think it was two mistakes in the thinking. Number one, most people did believe that there was sufficient support among the average man for drastic action. So any government is afraid of the voters and then don't act. And secondly, we saw every climate action as a cost. And then if it's a cost, well, should you spend it on climate or on healthcare or on education, or where should you spend it? So these two must be fixed. And it can only be fixed if we see climate as an enormous opportunity for the green transformation of the economy, which will bring the jobs. Then it's not a cost, it's an opportunity. And also, of course, we need to create a climate among people so that people demand action from governments. And I think there is a huge positive development here. In Europe, in the last election for the European Parliament, there was a surge in support of the Green parties. And in the most important nation in Europe, in Germany, the Green Party is now the biggest party in the polls. Let's see if they can keep that to the next election, but at least it shows a change in voter behavior, and let's hope we will see some of the same in the United States as well.
By the way, on the United States, it's worth saying that the climate policies of the current administration are quite unpopular with the voters. If you take polls, Americans disagree with the climate policies of the current administration. And by the way, the current president is quite unpopular with our voters too, but that's another topic. You asked about what we can do. I think, first, countries can learn from each other. And by the way, I think the world has a lot to learn from India. Just as one example, the Indian solar program in the past several years has been extraordinary, and the rate of deployment of solar power in India is incredibly impressive. You have companies like Renew Power, other companies that have scaled up dramatically and are bringing clean, renewable energy to the grid. Countries can learn from my country. By the way, emissions trading, amazing, ironically, is an American idea. It started in the United States, and now our federal government has abandoned it, but in Europe it's happening, in China it's happening, in our states it's happening as well. So we can learn from each other. But I think the most critical part is we need to face the fact that this is a crisis, that it requires sustained attention. If we don't face that, we're never going to come up with the solutions we need. I'm very hopeful, based upon what's happened in the past couple of days, that we're going to turn the corner and do that.
Let's hope for the best. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It was the most engaging conversation, and I believe change begins when you have conversations that dwell on possibilities. So hopefully this will contribute to action against climate change. Thank you.